Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Difficult Childhood. My name is Fallon, and I'm joined by my lifelong friend and amazing co host, Jason.
Hi,
In this
hi.
podcast, we talk about the experience of growing up inside the Jehovah's Witness organization and the challenging but ultimately more rewarding experience of breaking free and starting a life for yourself on the outside. So, this week, because election season is upon us here in the United States, we're going to be talking a little bit about some of the duplicitous practices of the JW organization when it comes to politics and government.
Wow, you nailed that. And I'm keeping this in because I want to tell everybody that I tried to do the intro like 4 times, I think it was, and I just fallen all over myself. And she she said, Fallon said, "Do you want me to do it this time, maybe, buddy?" And I'm like, "Okay." And then she just nails it in the first take. Good job. Well, yeah, we are talking about voting, and they are duplicitous. And I think the basic argument, this is the argument that Jehovah's Witnesses had for not voting, and I always accepted it as a JW.
Of
And
course.
that was that in John 18:36, Jesus says that you are, he's like, I'm no part of the world, my followers are not part of the world, something like that. And they took this to mean that if we believe in God's kingdom, that we would not involve ourselves in human kingdoms and those
Correct.
outcomes. They're unimportant.
Yes.
And I always accepted that. And in fact, today I was sitting thinking, okay, yeah, that makes sense. Wait a minute. No, it doesn't. Because if you apply that thinking to, for example, into medical treatment, I know that God's kingdom will solve all cancer. But what I'm going to go ahead and do is just ride this one out with this malignant tumor on my leg here and just wait for God's kingdom. Presidential elections, in particular, for the US, mean life and death for people all over. From economic decisions to involvement in conflict. It's life and death. You think about how like Ukraine, their choices from the U.S. affect people's lives over there. So I think that voting. I'm gonna put this, and maybe you guys comment if you think I'm wrong here. I think that voting, just like medical decisions, is a life and death thing, particularly in this situation when it's an entity like the U.S. government with as much power as it has. So I think we should all be involved.
Yeah. United States governmental affairs definitely have a ripple effect globally. So even if it's not necessarily election time, wherever you're joining us from, things that happen here can impact other places in the United States. Witnesses always, to the reasoning behind being politically neutral, they would say things like, "Well, you can't slave for two masters. So if you're devoted to God's kingdom and you're slaving for the organization, you can't also put your backing or your trust in any kind of human authority." Um, but I think it's interesting from a believer standpoint. Um, that the way they apply that thinking, I think is flawed because they're saying, separate yourself from the government, from politics, things like that. But there's so many facets of government or even like government programs that they do involve themselves with. And we're going to talk about a couple of those, but there's definitely some cherry picking. They're picking and choosing. They want to have their cake and eat it too.
Right. And you're a slave for two masters, that notion that they try to apply that to so many things. But
Yes.
you could literally, and that's a classic JW move. Pick a scripture and try to apply it to a
Just
bunch of
make it
different
work.
things.
Yeah.
And slave for two masters, you could literally say, "Oh, that's the reason that as Jehovah's Witnesses, we only have one employment at a time. We don't have a second job because you can't slave for two masters." It is not what that scripture is talking about.
Right.
It has nothing to do with it.
So a couple of the ways, just the first couple that came to my mind as far as, oh no, we want to be separate from government. We don't want to, contaminate ourselves with worldly governments. But if you think about all the government, state and federal programs that witnesses benefit from, many witnesses are enrolled in like Medicaid. A lot of them are considered low income. We've talked about that in previous episodes, including the one specifically on poverty culture, which we can link in
Pink.
the description. um, a lot of witness families, especially if you have a lot of children, are considered low income. So many of them, including myself, when I was a little girl, we definitely benefited from Medicaid programs and programs like that, food assistance, things like that. Conversely, a lot of JW seniors benefit from Medicare. A lot of them don't have personal savings or retirement plans that can privately fund healthcare. So Medicare is totally normal for JWs to benefit from, and good for them. But it's just a glimpse behind the curtain for them to say, "Oh yeah, we don't wanna contaminate. We don't wanna eat from, the table of demons." Um, but there's nobody saying, "Hey, don't sign up for Medicare."
That's, clearly contamination. If all that, if we're really being separate from the world, we should be completely self-sufficient. But they don't want that either, because these programs, these government programs, are subsidizing Jehovah's Witnesses, the organization. So you have people who are very low income, who are working as hard as they can. Then they're expected to donate a certain amount of their income. Then they're expected to go out and service and be exhausted and not be as effective at their jobs.
Yes.
And they're usually working part time. And then, of course, then they need food stamps, they need medical assistance, which I'm all for those who are low income getting assistance.
Sure.
When I pay my taxes, I want my taxes to do that. That's a hugely important thing. But I do not want it subsidizing some dumb religion, high control cult, because their members don't have any resources because they're just depleted from the organization.
Yeah. Another one that I thought about when I was a teenager, there was only one of all the zillions of teenagers I knew, my peers in
Mhm.
my circuit. I only knew of one person that attended
Wow.
an actual college. And she, like most normal college age students, signed up for tuition assistance, government grants, and she received quite a few. Um, those are government programs. So, but nobody told her not to.
Right. It was suddenly fine then.
It was okay.
That was the same for Rebecca. She signed up for, it was just before we got married, and she signed up for all the grants for school, and it was to become a dental hygienist, and so that she could pioneer, so she could just work a few days and then regularly pioneer the other days. That was the original idea. But of course, she did apply for that stuff, and that's good. I'm glad she got that stuff. She was low
Absolutely.
income at the time. It was before we got married. She just had one parent, very, very meager living situation. So it was good. I'm glad that she got that. But again, it was the government subsidizing Jehovah's Witness lifestyle.
Yeah.
And I don't remember how much it costs. I mean, you'd probably know, but I don't remember how much it costs to go through and get your bachelor's degree. But at the end of it, it was only like a $6,000 loan. That was all that was left.
Oh, wow. That's awesome.
Yeah,
I was not quite so lucky when I went to college, but I did also receive quite a few grants, and I competed and won a few scholarships that really helped, thankfully.
that's awesome.
So, the biggest shockwave in the JW community came a couple of decades ago, but I feel like it still didn't receive as much attention as it should have. In the early 2000s, it was made public that the Jehovah's Witness organization, or Watchtower Bible and Tract Society, was ending a 10-year relationship with the United Nations. It's public knowledge, it's verified. The United Nations verified it. They had the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society listed as a non governmental organization, which is basically, obviously, they're not a government, but they were a partner, basically. They were in cahoots together. Um, the witness explanation for this was that it was a paperwork error, which is totally ridiculous
For 10
because
years.
for 10 years, those applications have to be filed annually. I could maybe believe that one time it was an error, but you're telling me year after year for a decade or more, you accidentally um, enrolled in the United Nations? Like, get out of here. Come on. So there's an interesting article that I really enjoyed. Now, it is from 2001, just shortly after that relationship between the two entities ended. But we're going to link it. It's an article from the Guardian UK, um, and it basically just says yes, they were in cahoots. They did have this partnership, but it's so funny because in witness literature, of course, the United Nations is always described as the most evil of most evil worldly organizations. So in this article, there's a little paragraph where it says a former member said, "quote." There is a glaring inconsistency which has emerged between the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society's frequent portrayal of the UN as an evil organization and its behind the scenes attempts to curry favor with that organization. Were individual members to be aware of any formal link, they would be devastated. I don't know to what
Mhm.
degree that is true because depending on your level of indoctrination, you may or may not be devastated.
Right.
But I know when I first learned about it in the mid 2010s, like maybe 2014, 2015, there was already a waking up process that I was embroiled in, but that definitely blew my mind. And when I first read it, I thought, no, that can't be right. There's
Right.
no way. There's
Right.
no way. There, you're saying that this is the society, as it used to be known, was in partnership with the harlot and the scarlet colored beast? No, that can't be.
Almost
But
like
it
it's
was.
just a human organization made up by
If I didn't
dudes.
know better,
You know,
I'd swear that it was just a group of dudes driving this flying circus.
nuts. Yeah, they do. They lean into government assistance. They lean into government assistance. They lean into, of course, ingratiating themselves to the UN. So I believe it was argued that it was so that they could get access to a library. But again, you would want to have no part of that. Stop it. That's not a good excuse.
Weak at best.
And then they turn around and behave like anyone who is involved in politics or is voting is committing a dirty thing. Like you are
Absolutely.
you are defiling yourself, as you said before. You're eating at the table of demons,
Yes.
which I always thought that would be a cool dinner party, but that's beside the
What does
point.
that table look like?
Yeah, I don't know. Is there like somebody playing a fiddle? I don't know. There's a couple other things that I thought were interesting that the governing body does vote for. They vote for new members, which makes sense why part of the reason I think why they got rid of Anthony Morris was so that they could vote for their new members and get the 2/3 that they needed. To this day, also, the elder body votes for new elders. Now, you can say that it's a spirit appointed position. Okay. But what it really is a group of elders. Maybe there's 5 elders in one kingdom hall. They all sit in a room and they vote to recommend somebody to the circuit overseer to be an elder. The circuit overseer doesn't come in with special God powers to know that guy's motivations or everything he's done. They look at the recommendation of the local elders. So effectively, 99% of the time, or a very vast majority of the time, the elders recommend an elder from their vote. That's what's going to happen.
And even the way they vote has flip flopped over the years. The number of brothers that make up the governing body has varied. It's been as many as, I want to say, like 12, 9, 7, just it fluctuates. And so there have been times when they would vote on a matter, and it would carry as long as it was a majority vote. But then there have been other times, and I want to say I might have read this in Crisis of Conscience. Um, I could be mistaken about that, but there have been other times where the vote it you couldn't just pass it with a majority. It had to be a 2/3 or more vote. So when they had 9 members on the body, if 5 members voted, let's say, in favor of something, that wasn't enough to pass because 5 is not 2/3 of 9. So it would need 6 or more members to pass. So it again, it just shows the man-made oversight over these rules about how they vote, when they vote, and just
Right.
ridiculous.
Right. And side note, that was good math, buddy. Would you go to college or something? Wow. I'm
That American
homeschooled.
school diploma really
Yeah.
coming in handy these days.
You must have been paying better attention. So the organization obviously involves itself in the world, but I found that individual Jehovah's Witnesses really are not politically neutral. I think that that is a ridiculous thing to claim that they are politically neutral, and I have a basis for this. Admittedly, my control group is like of two people, but I remember my parents and or excuse me, my parents were watching one particular news outlet. I'll just say what it was. Doesn't really matter for the point of the story. They were watching Fox News almost exclusively, and they didn't watch into the other outlets. They stuck with one, which I feel is a bad idea. I like to watch different ones to get different, views. But that wasn't the point. The point was they were Jehovah's Witnesses, and they were exclusively watching one side of it, and then their their views switched and became more and more conservative and more Republican. Again, no problem with somebody who's a Republican. I want everybody to participate in the democracy and vote. I think that's the part that's cool and in the conversation. But they were supposed to be Jehovah's Witnesses, and they still are Jehovah's Witnesses. But we literally had a sit down with them, my brother-in-law and my sister and I, and we're like, you guys, it's almost an intervention. We had to get a little intervention banner. You guys Republicans? My dad said, no, of course not. That's ridiculous. We're completely neutral.
Sure.
Well, actually, all the views you seem to be espousing the last couple of years, and then they adjusted and they stopped, watching the more conservative news outlets then. But it just showed that to claim that we are all politically neutral is pretty absurd. I've known plenty
Sure.
of liberal Jehovah's Witnesses as well.
Sure.
I mean, with a few policy exceptions.
Uh, yes. There's no way that your viewpoint on certain subjects doesn't lean one way or the other. You just can't. I remember one time many decades ago, it was during the Olympics, and my mom said, have you been watching the Olympics? We always like to watch gymnastics. And I said, oh yeah, we won gold. And she said, what do you mean we? And I was like, the United States, meaning like we are also American citizens, and the American citizens representing this country won the gold medal. And she was like, oh no, Fallon, you don't say we. That that's involving yourself in like patriotism, government, nationality, nationalistic pride. I'm like, oh God. Can we just watch people on the balance beam? Like, why does it have to be this whole
Why does it have to be
thing?
so hard? We have to be separate about everything.
But I also think it's worth noting that if you are a believer, um, and you are applying, scripture in your life, as far as your involvement, whether or not to involve yourself in politics and voting and things like that, government issues. If you consider scriptures like Romans 13, 1-4, it says, let every person be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those that exist have been instituted by God. Therefore, whoever resists the authorities resists what God has appointed, and those who resist will incur judgment. So, from that point of view, I think it's fair when people ask things like, what difference does it make whether I vote? Because whatever government is in power is one that God has allowed to be in power. So what
Right.
difference does it make if I exercise my God-given, civil liberties and vote for the party that most aligns with my value set?
Fair. Like
Yeah.
it doesn't really make any difference anyway, the outcome. And the only thing I might take a question with there is I'm not sure that they're necessarily demonstrably God given.
I'm talking from a believer standpoint.
Oh, I see. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
All right, just write that down.
Noted.
They Yeah, it really would not make a difference. If you're thinking that the God has set up the government, then he's turning it left or right. It doesn't really make any difference what we do. So that's an interesting point. I also noticed that I was looking at JW Facts, and they have an interesting article there that we'll link. You can see that even though we're all supposed to be politically neutral and we're not doing flag salutes, you never see here a United States flag on a kingdom hall or outside on a flagpole.
Sure.
It is apparently a very common thing to see in Chile. The Chilean government has a fine for businesses, churches, and other certain organizations. For businesses, churches, and other certain organizations, and they it's not a huge fine, but if you are not flying the Chilean flag, then you can get a fine, and as a result, you can see kingdom halls with Chilean flags outside. You imagine here just seeing a U.S. flag just.
But see, that the place my mind automatically goes to is if the government is imposing a fine for not displaying the flag, which most kingdom halls would not, and you're finding a way to circumvent the fine, are you not paying back Caesar's things to Caesar?
Boom. Yeah.
I'm no mathematician, but that's not computing. That's not adding up.
I'm no meteorologist, but it's raining facts in here, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, agreed. Now, here is another example of the double standard that the organization has. We're talking about how they want to take advantage, they want to take handouts, but they also have literally given opposite advice to different parts of the world. And you've probably heard of this. If you haven't, you can look up the full details and I'll link it. But there was in the 70s an issue between Mexico and Malawi. So if you've already heard it, we'll build a little chapter here you can skip past. But this is what happened in Malawi. Jehovah's Witnesses were required, or everyone was required, to get your political card, and that political card cost a few bucks, and it also stated that you're involved in politics. The direction to those brothers and sisters, with quotes, was do not get it. And as a result, there are certain things we can't say here happened to particularly Jehovah's Witness women. And there were beatings, there were horrors visited upon the local Jehovah's Witnesses because they were told that they would be displeasing God by going against this governing body policy that was put out that they should not get this political card.
Yeah.
So, in the meanwhile, the governing body's looking at this and going, wow, shit got real over there. And then they saw Mexico, and they said when the brothers there were required to enlist in the army, I believe it was. Well, they went ahead and said it's okay for the brothers to bribe officials to get a fake exemption, like they weren't qualified to go into the service,
Mhm.
which is a very easy thing to do there. Apparently, you could just bribe them; they'd
Yeah.
write you the card, and you'd be good if you didn't want to do that. But and that prevented them from being harassed and potentially assaulted and other horrors being visited upon them, just like in Malawi. So the organization, and this is in actually in Raymond Franz's book, Crisis of Conscience, chapter 6. It is where it goes through this. It's pretty horrific
Yeah.
what they went through in Malawi, and then the band-aid approach solution, a little fix-it solution for Mexico and for that situation. So this organization is not consistent, and as a result, I don't think we should ever believe them when they put out a policy and say, hey, this is the way God wants it to be. Don't vote. That's what Jesus was talking about. Don't you vote. They're untrustworthy.
Oh, ab
And this
absolutely.
and everything, but specifically this is my point.
And just to kinda tag team, off what you were saying about the Mexico versus Malawi and how, the direction was to bribe these officials. If you're not familiar with how JW thinking works, They say it's okay to lie under this banner of that it's theocratic warfare. But I feel like because so many documents that are supposed to be internal within the organization inevitably make their way to the public, this thinking, this theocratic warfare or lying is okay, um, is now public knowledge, and I feel like it's poisoning public perception of Jehovah's Witnesses, and that they work hard to try to portray themselves as like separate from the rest of the world. And one big pillar of that perception is that they're honest. They're just honest to a fault. But even in that article that we mentioned earlier from the Guardian, there is a quote in here, and it says, an internal document, the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society describes its policies as, quote, theocratic war strategy. It claims, quote, in a time of spiritual warfare, it is proper to misdirect the enemy by hiding the truth. It is done unselfishly. It does not harm anyone. On the contrary, it does much good. So I feel like they're shooting themselves in the foot because they're working so hard to say, we're neutral, we don't lie, we're honest, but these policies, once they're made public, just undo all of that.
Right. And in support of what you just said there, as evidence to support it here, yes, they definitely do believe in this so-called spiritual warfare. And as many of you may have heard, just a few months ago, Watchtower's chief counsel, Philip Brumley, was fined $154,000 and change for his role in misleading the court by filing two false and deceptive affidavits. An affidavit, you are a court, you are a member of the court if you're the lawyer there, and you are filing disingenuous or misleading affidavits. What? And this is on July 14th, 2024. I will link this source as well. So they do it. They don't have a problem with it. They're super stoked on it. It's something that they lean into. And for if I were a believer in Jehovah, as Jehovah's Witnesses claim to be, and Jehovah is my absolute paragon ideal of what I'm shooting for, the perfect person. Why is it that their Jehovah cannot lie? So that should be something you're shooting for as well. God cannot lie. So therefore, it should be an absolute don't lie. Don't give out information you don't have to, but don't lie. And they love lying. They are fine with it. Like what they did with the Australian Royal Commission. It's been said and said and said with Jackson, governing body member Jeffrey Jackson. So
Yeah.
they don't. Yeah, they don't care. They're fine with that.
And so secondary to the theocratic warfare reasoning to justify certain things, the flip side of that coin is if it's not done in the name of theocratic warfare, then it's new light. Yeah, you couldn't get the political card before, but new light says you can. We have a new understanding. But that also is totally flawed thinking, especially if you're a believer, because there are so many places in the Bible, Hebrews 13:8. If you believe that Christ is the head of the congregation, Hebrews 13:8 says Jesus is the same yesterday, today, and forever. Malachi 3 verse 6 says, I am the Lord God and I do not change. So whatever his leadership is over the physical human congregation, if that's a reflection of his being, his personality, his wisdom, et cetera, it's unchanging. So this band-aid that they put on all these situations, oh, it's new light, we're just understanding more. That's not sufficient. That's flawed thinking.
Agreed. I also think there's a difference in the governing body gladly accepts tax exempt status, which I
Mhm.
can see because they are a religion, and if the government under which you're operating allows for that, why not take advantage of it?
Sure.
However, the organization is more than happy to accept government handouts, and not just for their members, like we were talking about before, like because so many members are low income, they qualify for a lot of government assistance. The organization, as you may know, and if you don't, have a look at some of the links we'll put in here. They recently lost, I believe, about $1.5 million a year, an actual check that the organization was having cut by the government
Like
and given to
subsidies.
them to run their organization. Exactly. So they're pretending to be a charity, and they do nothing for people,
Yeah.
and they actually take the money. And I guess my real problem with that is, number one, I don't want to be, in the United States, I don't want to be subsidizing any religion, particularly Jehovah's Witnesses. But and this is with Norway. But where'd I go? Oh, Jason, jeez, my thought went over there. I'll catch it. Look at a butterfly net. The organization should be offended to take, money from some government source. It's Satan's system. Why would you want to take that? Satan's offering you money and you're willing to take it. In fact, if you lose it, you're going to fight over it. You should be rejecting it. So the organization, it clearly engages in voting internally. They do lobbying in courtrooms to get their money back, or what they think is their money. They accept subsidies. They accept the tax exemption status and many governments give them. They want to take everything from the world, and then they also accept worldly medical research that is resulted in things, and tell their followers, their members, except for blood things, to accept things from Satan's system, like
Yeah.
like medical treatment. But when it comes
Vaccines.
to voting, to involving themselves in something that really does matter a great deal, if, like we said before, if one person wins or another person wins, it can be the difference of lives.
Yes.
But that they draw the line. And why do you think that is? I think why do you think that is? That's the hill they die on. What is that?
I think it's twofold. I think the first smaller part of it is just the continual us versus them. But the bigger issue, I think, is they want to have a scapegoat. They want to have someone or something that they can vilify as the physical representation of the the devil's presence in the earth. Someone that they can look at, point to, and say, this is who's oppressing us. This is why we're struggling. This is a manifestation of evil in the heavens. This is evil on the earth. I think they want to have a villain. They need a bad guy in the story, other than just heavenly figures.
Right. Uh, Perfectly direct. I think that's a theme that goes on through a lot of different religions. There's Satan. You need to have a bad guy to point at, or this is why everything's going awfully. But I think that Jehovah's Witnesses certainly take that to a new level. They've got their bad guy Satan, but then they add to it with the government. The government, when they side with us and we win a case, we then they are, well, that's God's spirit that directed even this worldly government official to see the light. And when they lose, then, oh, well, that's just Satan and his system working against us.
Right. You can't have your cake and eat it too.
I mean, you can. It's just, you'll get fat.
Okay. But I have yet to see. I've worked with many JWs over the years, and I have yet to see the JW that turned down a Christmas bonus.
Yep,
So it's all bananas. But
it
we
is.
do encourage you, regardless of where you live, or whether you're just now leaving the organization or you've been out for a while. If you're interested in getting in politics, educate yourself, because we left the organization as adults, and when I tell you I knew nothing about government and nothing about politics, that's probably an understatement. So if you're interested in the voting process, really do your research and learn about it, and then make your decision based off of where your value set lies.
Yeah, I like that. And I'd like to add, I was talking with my friend Jackie. She was talking about she's an older person, and she was talking about how she has evolved politically throughout her life. And now she says, you know what I landed on? If you're in the U.S., you know what she's talking about. Uh, I watch Fox News and CNN. And I split the diff, and I look at what, okay, that seems disingenuous. Okay,
Sure.
that seems correct. And then the same thing on the other side. I think looking at both sides, both on the news outlets, but then also I might recommend that or suggest that if you're newer to politics, just coming out, look at both sides on your social media too, because if you watch TikTok and Facebook and Instagram and all those, they are always trying to figure out your leaning so that they
Yes.
can reinforce that leaning.
Yes. Based on what you like or what feed you follow, they'll stoke whatever fire you put out there for them.
I've done this trick to Instagram before where I will linger on an advertisement for male pattern baldness. I don't have that issue. I also will linger on the big and tall ad. I'm 5'8". I just like to screw with it. I do that politically too. I will linger on each side, and then I've literally had TikTok coming up and going, "What are you? Why are you like this? I got
Label
to figure out."
yourself so we can corner you.
Exactly. And so I would suggest to anybody that don't believe the things without verifying. And I guess just apply the same thing that we're trying to apply, to the Jehovah's Witness organization, third party verification.
Agreed.
But it's also really, really fun to learn about this stuff.
It
And
is.
I think it's terribly interesting. I think it's something I would have been incredibly bored with as a teenager, but now I'm an adult. I'm like, oh, this stuff matters. This is interesting.
Well, it's definitely boring as a JW kid because you're like, none of this pertains to me anyway. I mean, I remember,
Senate Schminute.
social civics, like, running through chapters on government, but it's like, oh, I mean, I know what it is, but it doesn't affect me. I'm in my little JW bubble.
Hmm.
And of course, now as a full adult, I'm like, oh, but it does affect me. When tax
Very much
time
so.
rolls around, it
Hmm.
affects me.
How much are my taxes going to be? Am I going to be able to get the things that I need? Or,
Yeah.
it's a
Can I
huge,
refinance my
huge.
house?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's so many things like that, and it really does affect us. And so it's a fun adventure, I guess. That's the upshot.
Yeah. Get out there. And plus, if you vote, you get a sticker that says I voted.
Yeah. So how are you going to vote this election?
Actually, I think I'm going to vote for.
Future is bright. We're taking flight from shadows to sunlight. Everything's alright. Turn the page now. New day's begun. All that we dream, we have won. In the mirror's gaze, see strength and grace. From a troubled place, now we embrace. Future is bright.